Hey there everyone, Ian here, and welcome back to the channel. This week we are going back to the basics of writing. There are 3 fundamental building blocks to creative writing, and these are plot, character, and setting. Each have a reason to exist and are sometimes the most important part of your writing. Throughout this video and the next few videos, I will be going over why these should be the first considerations you make when writing a story. This first video will be focused on the plot of the story. If you missed last week's video, we already talked some about characters, but I will be going more in depth about what makes it important in the next videos. If you need help with some characters, make sure you go back and watch that. And with that being said, let's get into the video. So first, what is plot? We already went over this in the first video I made on this channel, but just to make it easier to follow, we're going to go over what makes a plot again. Plot is what happens throughout the story, and more specifically, it's about how these change and affect the characters throughout the story. Just like I said in the first video, the plot focuses more around how the characters change throughout a story. I enjoy this a lot more than just saying it's what happens in a story. It makes it deeper and helps you to really get to the roots of how to make a coherent story or a plot. There are 3 different sections of this video that are going to be coming after this. You have kinds of plots, plot archetypes, and plot structures. All of these mean different things, and I will get into them one at a time. There are 4 different kinds of plots when you're writing a story that you can choose from, or you could even sometimes have a mix between these. The first kind is a linear plot. It's a kind of plot that has a basic beginning, middle, and end. These also go from start to finish without any deviation. A lot of books, most books, follow this format of linear beginning, middle, end. An example of this kind of plot would be Pride and Prejudice, or again, most books follow this linear format, so it's not hard to find one that goes along with this. I like writing linear stories because it's easy to just go from the start to finish without having to do different things throughout the story to make it more interesting. The next kind of plot is an episodic plot. An episodic plot is a story that is split into a variety of smaller, self-contained stories or episodes connected by a larger narrative or unifying theme. An example of this would be Catcher in the Rye. Episodic stories are more difficult to write than a linear story because you don't have a set beginning, middle, and end. And the episodic format, you have to have the little stories in it have to match up together to one unifying theme or the plot of the story. This makes it a lot more difficult than if you were writing a straight linear storyline. Parallel plot is the next thing on my list on these 4. A parallel story is when a writer includes 2 or more storylines that coexist that are connected by character, event, or theme. But whatever it's linked by has to be common between all of the storylines. An example of this would be Lord of the Rings. There are multiple storylines, but they're all connected by a specific theme, event, or character. So this is more of a linear thing, but you can still make an episodic parallel plot, but that might be even harder than what you may believe it to be. What I'm currently writing is a linear parallel story. It goes beginning, middle, end, but there's 2 storylines taking place. The last kind of plot is a flashback plot, and this is self-explanatory. It's a story that uses flashbacks to expand across the narrative. For this, I could not find any examples, but I'm sure there are some that use this, as it is a kind of plot. What's nice about flashbacks is that it can be put into any of the previously mentioned plot types. I said earlier that there were plot archetypes, and that is true, but what I have is not specifically plot archetypes. They are more different plot structures And these are specific, and then after that we will go over different ways that you would be able to outline a story. So I'm sorry for misrepresenting this earlier, but this is what it's going to be for the next couple parts. The first part is tragedy. In a tragedy plot structure, you are going to want to make the characters suffer. That's really fun if you like to make your characters suffer. If you like to write really fluffy things, then, well, you might never hurt your characters. An example of a tragedy would be Romeo and Juliet. Everyone knows that. Everyone read it in high school. The next kind is a comedy, the opposite of a tragedy. In comedies, you want to make the characters happy in the story. You want to make your readers smile and laugh. And if you do it well, you will be able to make people enjoy it very easily. An example of this one would be The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now we have the classic hero's journey. This one is when a hero goes on a journey to solve a new problem. You have multiple examples of this throughout history, from ancient times up to now. You have books like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, that the hero goes on a journey to save the world from an awful, terrible evil. They are still done really well, even though they've been done millions of times throughout history. Something everyone seems to enjoy to read once in their lives, at least. Next are the rags to riches stories. This is when a character starts with nothing, but gets everything at the end. That's why it's called rags to riches. You may not become rich at the end of a rags to riches story. You may become intelligent in something, or you may get the money that rags to riches promotes with its name. But again, your riches that the character gains does not have to be money or power. An example of a rags to riches story would be Red Queen. After that, you have rebirth stories. Rebirth stories are when a character that is bad becomes good, or when they're reborn from good to bad because of something that happens in the story. It could be a positive or negative character arc, depending on how you make the story. An example of this one would be A Christmas Carol. We're almost to the next part, but not quite yet. The next kind I have is Overcoming the Monster. This is your typical good versus evil. A good protagonist might have to stop an evil antagonist. A very clear example of this would be Star Wars, at least in the original trilogy, in that Darth Vader is considered the monster. The last kind we have are voyage and return stories. This is when a character goes from one place to another and then returns with newfound knowledge or newfound victory. An example of this would be Alice in Wonderland. A lot of these I just went over can be combined together to make a story more interesting in and of itself. Since we're thinking about it, why don't we talk about plot archetypes, actually? These previous things on their own could be considered plot archetypes if you really want them to be, and some of them I do consider to be a plot archetype, like a hero's journey would fit in a plot archetype. A plot archetype is a style of plot, and it's what you are trying to achieve in a story. A heist story would be an example of a plot archetype, or a master apprentice sort of story would also be considered a plot archetype. There are a massive list of these throughout the internet and everywhere else. There is no master list you can find anywhere. Everyone's opinions are different on these. And with that, we're going to move on to story structures. And these story structures are typically used to help you write stories, and a lot of the time this has to do with outlining. If you outline a story, these different structures will help you outline as you go. In the future, there will be videos on different kinds of plot structures, but for now we're just gonna go over some of them. The first one is my personal favorite, and that's the 3-act story structure. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. the perfect number of 3s. Personally, what I use to outline, although with more in-depth things. After the 3-act story structure, you would have a plot pyramid, save the cat, maybe you'd use the snowflake method. There are more than that, but those are some of the ones that I remember. These are tools to help you with the outlining process, but if you don't outline, then it can still help you by giving you places where you need to think about what happens throughout the story, so you don't get bogged down in one place or make it boring over the entire narrative of the story. Now, what are the benefits of having a good plot? Why is plot important? I gave you all of these things about plot, and I haven't really told you why any of this is important. Well, the plot is, at its base, a sequence of events that make up a narrative. But like I said earlier, it's also about what happens to the characters, and in some cases, the plot may push a story forward, but that would be only with plot-driven stories. The kind of stories I like to read are character-driven. So the characters drive the story forward more than the plot does. Without a plot, there would be no direction for the story to go. There would be nothing that starts the story, or ends it, or gives your readers any sort of semblance of structure in your story. Without a strong plot, it is very likely it'll fall flat, or it'll be boring and uninteresting. And that's something you don't want. If your plot is boring, just like character or the world, then nothing's really gonna make sense. It'll be boring, and a reader will stop reading at that point. A human's attention span is not long, so if you give them a reason to put a book down, they may never come back to it. And finally, without a plot, your characters and world won't make sense in the narrative. This is also the same thing the other way around. Characters and setting won't work well without the plot. And that's it. That's everything you need to know to get started with the plot and why it is so important in the writing process. Comment below what you learned and how I can improve my videos for you in the future. I hope this helped. If it did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, since I upload videos like this every Sunday. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!